Democrats and now Republicans have flipped the off switch on their virtual conventions, and the presidential campaigns will roar into September. So, too, do New Mexico's high-profile federal races. That's where our Line Opinion panel steps in with some analysis. Here on the screen is Line regular and attorney Laura Sanchez. We also have Dan Boyd with us. He's the Albuquerque Journal's Capitol Bureau Chief. And great to see you and political science professor Lana Atkinson again. And Lana, you're following the presidential race, of course, but you're also curious about how the themes of those conventions informs campaigns here. Tell me about that. What's your sense of what you thought the big themes were?
Well, we've really, seen two very different conventions and two very different views, and we can see those in our candidates and how they're talking about the different issues, either coronavirus or law and order, of course, is a big issue for the Republicans, and their convention is going on now.
Mm-hmm. Dan, interestingly, when you think about it, we all had to get used to a bit of a new look, so to speak, for conventions. We're so used to balloons and cheering people and all that kind of thing. But, do any of the candidates for Senate or U.S. House here are picking up on this theme that that Lana is talking about? Are you seeing the same things playing out here in New Mexico at this point?
Yeah, I think we've kind of adapted to a lot of these campaigning, remote campaigns, virtual campaigns. Mm-hmm. It certainly makes it more difficult, to connect with voters, I think. But I think, like Lana said, we've really seen a difference in tone, the two conventions. Interestingly, both of them have had a pretty heavy New Mexico kind of component to them, both the Democrats with the governor and Congresswoman Deb Haaland, both in prime time. The Republicans have had a few speakers as well, an Albuquerque police officer, mm-hmm. and, the widower of a woman who was killed last year in a high-profile crime. So we've kind of coming from different perspectives, but it's, a heavy dose of New Mexico.
Mm-hmm. Laura Sanchez-Rivey, I'm curious. You've been around this game a long time, and I'm just curious. Is the coattails for down ballot folks, is that still a thing? Is that going to be a thing in this presidential race as well?
I think it's always a thing in presidential years. And yeah, I think there's going to be some of that. But what's interesting about New Mexico is, we always sort of see ourselves as a bellwether of sorts. And I think that more recently we've been trending Democrat. And so the Republicans, though, are not giving up. And I don't think that Democrats are looking to kind of lose any ground. And so both sides are really going to be at it at the local level as much as possible. Mm-hmm. So while there will be coattails, certainly for the federal races that are going on, there's also, I think, a reasonable expectation of a surge from the local level, because you're going to see in some of these local races, well, certainly the federal ones, but even in some of the more competitive House and Senate races, where people will do what they can to get their little, solid voters to the polls. And that's going to result in some uptick for even the higher ones, the presidential ones. Most people have probably, I think most people think that they've made up their minds, but the Republicans are certainly trying to do what they can to get, more people to be peeled off from the Democrat than vice versa. So I think we're still going to see a lot of, traditionally this stuff isn't supposed to get started till after Labor Day. So we'll see what they pull out of their sleeve, right?
That's right. Exactly right. Lana, I'm curious if any of this is playing out to your eye in newspaper, radio ads, TV ads. Are you seeing some of these themes playing out in paid advertising so far?
Oh, absolutely. Especially in the Senate race, especially with Ronchetti. He's clearly talking about sort of national themes and the culture war. I think his ad starts something like faith, family, and freedom. So those are very much trying to tap into these bigger cultural issues that we're discussing as a nation.
Mm-hmm. Dan, interesting on the same theme, CD2. We've all seen, you can't avoid them, the commercials for Xochitl Torres Small. She might as well have dipped herself in a red tank. I mean, she is really leaning into it. It's incredible. And we all get it with the district she's in, but again, the themes that are playing out through paid advertising, would she be an example of what we're talking about here?
Yeah, certainly. I think she came out with an ad again this week about her, with shotgun, and Yvette Harrell, her Republican opponent, also had a shooting ad. So right. We can kind of see the demographic both of them are targeting. It does seem like there's a lot of similarities in that race as 2 years ago. So it'll be interesting to see over the next 2.5 months, outside groups, outside spending. I think that's going to be one, that a lot of outside money is going to be coming to the state, and it'll probably be really close again. But kind of the Trump impact, as was mentioned before, I think will be big in that, and clearly kind of a referendum on Trump and in that district, which has been, historically conservative.
I appreciate you saying that. We should put a pin in that idea of money coming in from out of state. That's going to happen. You're exactly right. Not a lot of folks have talked about that yet, but you're exactly right. Laura Sanchez, speaking about money, are you seeing a serious run by Republicans when it comes to CD1, when it comes to raising money? Are you seeing this happen? Are we going to have a competitive race here?
I can't see more money being spent in CD1 than they will do in CD2.
Okay.
CD2 is really the one that's in play for them. And the same with CD3. They're just not going to gain any ground, I don't think, by putting a lot of money into CD3 or CD1 when CD2 is the ballgame for them. That's a district that's flip-flopped several times over the last 10 years. We saw Harry, and I think that part of the election, in addition to money, is surrogates. So those surrogates start to mean more at the local level. So, so-and-so's endorsing them or so-and-so's opposing this person. Therefore, I will make a decision because I like what they stand for. So, for example, Harry Teague, who held that district before Steve Pearce picked it back up, has endorsed Yvette Herrell. But then you have, interestingly enough, the head of NMOGA, Ryan Flynn, who's the executive director of the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association, who came out with a letter supporting Torres Small in that race. And then he got criticized by some of the folks that were backing Harry Teague for having done that and were calling for his resignation. So it became this whole oil and gas thing. And then, of course, some of you may have seen the ad with the local sheriff who is saying, I'm a Democrat, but I'm supporting Yvette Herrell and not Xochitl Torres Small. So it's very interesting. I think we're going to see a lot more of that as we go forward. We'll see some of that also in the other districts, but we're really going to see most of the noise in the Senate district and in CD2.
Gotcha. Lana, would you go ahead?
Mm-hmm. Also shows how there, that we're like this microcosm of what's going on nationally. There's so much movement going on in the parties. People are, maybe people are thinking about crossing over and change. There's really so much going on under the hood, and that's being exemplified in what's going on in this race that is receiving national attention. This may be the most competitive race in the country.
I'm going to stay with you on that. Let's talk about that. I want to talk about some presidential stuff too. Obviously, the president of the United States made a lot of noise last year and earlier this year about winning New Mexico. Are you seeing the effort at this point, Lana?
I mean, certainly we've seen some ads, but it's hard to tell because there's no, with no traditional kinds of activities going on for candidates, it's really hard to know what's happening. And, where's the enthusiasm? It's hard to tell if there's enthusiasm or if there's hatred, or it's just impossible to know. Very, very challenging time to be a pundit.
That's a good point.
If I could jump in real quick, Gene, I do think that, we're in such an interesting period right now, not just with COVID, but I think politically, everything that's happened in the last year or so, and really in the last, since Trump was elected last time, we've had a surge of women running for office, women being more active politically. I think that the women's vote is going to be such a huge component of this election in New Mexico. And to what Lana mentioned of New Mexico being a microcosm of the rest of the country, it'll be interesting to see how things play out here, because we, for the first time, have every CD district, we're going to guarantee to have a woman, whether it's a Republican or Democrat, there'll be a woman holding each of those congressional districts. So, when women run, women vote, right? Women vote and then women win. And so you're going to see more women go into the polls. And I think it's a question of, will they be turned off by Trump, even if they're Republican, maybe or independent, maybe they're more moderate, or they're not interested in the kind of leadership that he has shown to now. I think it'll be interesting to see how that plays out in the presidential.
And there's gender polarization going on in the state as well. I mean, that's really interesting to bring up because the parties themselves are very gendered, both at a national level and in New Mexico. There are many more women who are committed to the Democratic Party, and there are more men committed to the Republican Party. The gender gap has never been bigger.
What does that mean, with the gender gap getting this big, Lana, and bigger beyond for candidates? How do they have to respond to this? You clearly can't ignore it.
I mean, I think it's very challenging in the sense that we sort of are genderizing our parties, obviously Yvette Herrell, and we've had Republican women running as well in all of these races. But if we think of it more at a bigger level, the real surge in female candidate activity is coming from the Democratic side, and there's still a dearth of female players in the Republican Party.
This should be interesting. By the way, folks, I want to let you know that Professor Atkinson at the Department of Political Science at the University of New Mexico. She is the director of the Center for the Study of Voting, Elections, and Democracy there. She's also the executive director for the Institute for Social Research at the University of New Mexico. Now, we have to leave it there for now. One of the election issues we have been and will be following is the U.S. Postal Service. President Trump's Postmaster General has pulled mail sorting machines and mailboxes from communities across the country ahead of what's expected to be the largest mail-in turnout in U.S. history. Now, an Albuquerque-based software designer has teamed up with an online mapping community to keep a close eye on what mailboxes may have been removed through a new community source web application. NMIF correspondent Megan Kamerick talked to Russ Biggs about his work.